Republicans told you they were okay with him bragging about sexual assault. They told you that they were okay with him extorting a foreign nation, okay with him enriching himself off of the presidency, okay with him pardoning his buddies, taking national security documents and showing top secret information to private citizens, okay with him threatening to execute our generals, okay with him siding with Putin, okay with him inciting a deadly attack on our capital to stay in power, okay with him being a business fraud and an adjudicated rapist, and okay with him being a convicted felon. They've told you they're okay with the pathological lying, the idiocy, the amorality, the vitriol, the violent threats, the racism, the sexism, and the xenophobia. They've told you they're okay with him making fun of people with disabilities, okay with him calling women dogs, okay with him being cruel, and okay with him being a bully. They've told you that they're okay with him separating children from their parents. And they're telling you, as we speak, that they're okay with child sex trafficking. They're telling you that they are okay with adult men having sex with children. And those of you who voted for this, who voted for them, those of you, they say, have now handed them a mandate in this election, have told them that you're okay with all of it too. So the question is, are you? My guest on the podcast this week is California Congressman Ro Khanna. I'm so grateful to Congressman Khanna for coming on and talking to me. This is what we need more of. He's got great ideas for moving forward, for sort of shifting gears and refocusing our energy and attention. And I think that is part of what we need to do. But I think we also need to retool our approach to messaging and the spaces that we message in. I talk about this all the time. You guys know I firmly believe this, that people just aren't consuming news in the same traditional ways they always did. And I try really hard to be a responsible steward of the truth. So I want to have the kinds of conversations with the electeds and with the candidates that can illuminate both where we go from here, what went wrong, and how we win. Because let's face it, we don't have a choice. We gotta fight, and we have to fucking win. Welcome to the Are You Effing Kidding Me podcast. That's the name of my podcast, Congressman. I don't know if you knew what you were quite signing up for. California's 17th Representative Ro Khanna, thank you so much for being here.
Well, I appreciate it. I don't think Frank Luntz would mind my saying this. I had dinner with him last night, and I said, the working and middle class have really gotten shafted. And he said, no, what you really need to say is they've gotten effed. And so your podcast is right in line.
You know what? Sometimes a swear is really the only way you can cut it, right? Like sometimes it just says it best. And I've done a lot of swearing since the election day, Congressman. But let's talk less about that swearing part and the loss and more about what we can do moving forward, because I want to talk about your op-ed in the Boston Globe entitled "My Democratic Colleagues and I Need to Face These Harsh Truths." So let's talk about these harsh truths if we can.
Absolutely. Well, look, the first part of the harsh truth is we've got to see people where they are. And that is they really feel that the political system, the economic system has been rigged against them, that while wealth has piled up in places like Silicon Valley, the average American has seen jobs offshored, their plants closed, not just their plants closed in 1990, up till 2022, plants were shutting down because of NAFTA. They've seen the cost of childcare and daycare explode, the cost of college explode, healthcare explode. They have seen unions decline. And they don't feel like the American dream is there for them. I think the first thing the Democratic Party needs to do is just understand that, see folks, instead of going around with concerts, have people who've lost jobs be at these rallies and say, I hear you, you got a raw deal. Then we've got to say our highest priority is solving this inequality. Our highest priority is making sure the American dream is going to be accessible, not just to the folks who invent AI, but to the Americans around this country, some of whom had great-grandfathers who fought in World War II or who fought in many in the Civil War, or some go all the way back to the Revolutionary War, and they're wondering where's their place in America. So I think that has to be the core narrative. And one more point, and then I want to hear from you, but you can't. The Vice President Harris had a lot of good policies. Okay, we should have home care for for elderly folks. But you're not going to be leader of the free world by saying, okay, let's have home care for elderly folks. What you need to do is make people feel heard and seen and say how you're going to take them and their families to the future.
Yeah, I think from what I'm observing myself as, an amateur sort of a pundit, so to speak, but as a human being who lives in the suburbs in a town that has consistently voted Trump and Republican now. I'm in New Jersey's 7th, by the way. Thom Jr., your
Yeah.
colleague, is unfortunately Sue Altman, who I love very much, didn't quite get there, but I hope she comes back. She's amazing. I've had lots of conversations with people who live in states like Missouri and parts of Wisconsin and parts of Pennsylvania, where they have long said, we feel left behind. We feel like our party sort of abandoned us and they're not knocking on our doors. They're not showing up here. Our factory closed. They're not really showing up here to show me a way out or an option. They felt left behind. And I think, you talked in this piece about an economic New Deal, right? So I think that it's partly that they feel that way, but also as a person who kept trying to get the message through, they just weren't receiving the messages, and everyone kept saying it was because they weren't feeling what we were trying to tell them was happening. Like I could have told them 10,000 times Biden's economy is strong. If they didn't feel it in their real lives, which they clearly didn't, nothing I ever said was going to matter. So let's talk about the economic New Deal, if you might.
Well, sure. I mean, the new economic deal says we start by saying both parties really shafted a lot of folks in America, that we had the offshoring of industry. Consider Western Pennsylvania. It used to make more steel than Japan and Germany combined during World War II. Today, America makes 4% of the steel. We let aluminum industry leave America. We let the textile industry leave America. And at the same time, you're seeing $12 trillion of market value in Silicon Valley, AI and technology, Apple and Google. And so folks are wondering, they're saying, it's hard for me to buy a house. It's hard for me to make the daily bills and expenses. I don't know my kids are going to have a better life. The politicians hollowed out a lot of the industry in America. Why should I trust them? And then we come in and say everything is strong and great. And it's not true. Now we can say that it took 50 years to break this. It's going to take more than 4 years to rebuild it. And we have actual ideas of how to build new factories. You got to have government investment and financing in it. You can't just give tax cuts. You can't do what Donald Trump did, which is give tax cuts to companies that are moving offshore, where you get less of a corporate tax to put up a plant in Mexico, 10% than tax if you put up the plant in Wisconsin, which is 21%. But before we get to all of the policies, we have got to first feel people and understand that they feel that the system hasn't worked. And I think if we do that, we can start to break through. And then we have to be the party that has the better ideas, the more modern ideas to get them to feel like we could make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, those conversations, they're so necessary to be able to make people feel seen and to trust you. Like your point, if they don't trust you, they're not going to listen to anything you have to say. And we saw that in this election where they didn't trust what they were being told. So they were like, let me go with him again. For at least he's a straight shooter. We can dissect that all day long. But in terms of policy, you mentioned in the article, you're the co-author of the Chips and Science Act, and you even say it didn't go far enough. And essentially that it didn't address some of these core issues that we might have missed. And so can you expound on that a little bit?
Sure. Well, one, the chips buildings still aren't up. I mean, it took 2 years. People in Congress are really good about, okay, I'm going to allocate money, but that doesn't mean you've done the job. You got to actually have the factories start being built. And it took 2 years for the money to be dispersed. What I've called for is, FDR used to have something called $1 a year men. Now it should be men and women. But basically, you got business leaders from industry to help come into government to industrialize America. And what President Biden, in my view, or the future Democratic president should do is to get a lot of business leaders, unions to say, okay, help us actually execute this. So factories are coming up. One of the things I'm saddened about with Elon's focus, and I've known him for many, many years, is that he's going to be sort of dismantling agencies. I rather that we be working with business leaders to build things in this country, to make things, to build factories. And then the reality is not every place is going to get a semiconductor fab. I don't know the 7th New Jersey district well enough, but it takes a lot of unique things. So fine, Columbus, Ohio is getting it, but not Johnstown, Pennsylvania, not the places in Illinois that were deindustrialized or downriver Michigan. So what can we do in those communities? How are we having economic development in places that were most hard hit? And not every place is going to be a semiconductor factory. Some may be a steel plant. Some may be apprenticeship programs. Some may be investment in nonprofits. Some may be investment in technology jobs. We need a unique economic development strategy for small towns and factory towns, and not just a few semiconductors.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that part of the vision was there was supposed to be this big shift and pivot towards green energy, and that was going to bring all these jobs to these places. I mean, again, it's not a thing that's necessarily been actualized, although in some places it's coming online, but not fast enough, I guess, to your point. And now I feel we're going to lose a lot of the progress we have made because this administration is clearly not interested in any sort of green energy. But you mentioned Elon, and that efficiency that they needed two people to department to run. It's ironic in and of itself, right? But like again, so here's where my brain comes back to again. I just had this conversation with Mehdi Hassan, and where we diverge a little bit. Is that yes, you're absolutely right. Where this is the policies themselves that people need to understand and they need to feel seen, and we need to address that. But there's also some kind of a disconnect for me where I'm looking at this not necessarily being a policy debate or a policy election because Donald Trump didn't offer them any policies. Like he didn't say anything that he was going to actually offer for them. And plus, they've got those 4 years that they could look back to where he didn't do anything for them, but he instead gave this tax cut to the richest, which has saddled our country with a huge amount of debt, which nobody talks about. But so I think, well, if it is definitely what you're saying, and the people are not feeling seen and they're feeling left behind and they're feeling like they're not getting an opportunity to prosper. But it seems like there's something else at play here to get them to be able to vote for someone who has not promised them anything. So that is a messaging issue, but it's also that we're just not physically where we need to be in the space. And you and I talked briefly before I started recording about me being a social media person. And I think we might need to retool our approach to talking to people in places like the spaces I inhabit over here on social media. I mean, what do you think about all of that?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, look, we should be everywhere. It's no longer the case that you could just hold a press conference or go on the nightly news or give a State of the Union speech and expect the American people to hear you. You got to be active. You got to do podcasts every day if you're a presidential candidate. And if you're a president, you've got to be active on podcasts, on media, being real, getting a sense so people get a sense of you, not worrying about gaffes. I think your voice is so important, and we need more people like you to develop those kind of podcasts because you develop a connection, and someone is going to find out more about me and what I think on this than they can on 5 minutes of an interview on Face the Nation. Not because Margaret Brennan isn't terrific. She is. She's a very thoughtful and smart interviewer, but you only have 5 minutes. But here you get maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, you get a better sense. So we've got to be much more aggressive. And the thing I think Donald Trump did, there are two things. He had no solutions, but he was willing to say people have been shafted, that they really have gotten the raw deal. And then he blamed unfairly the reason you got a raw deal is immigrants. Wrong diagnosis, but that's what he said. And the reason you got a raw deal is China and NAFTA. Some of that, yeah, there were bad trade deals, but I don't think we started enough with you got a raw deal. And we should say the reason you got a raw deal is because of big money in politics. The reason you got a big raw deal is because policies that allowed the offshoring of jobs, that allowed corporate executives to get a lot of the pay at the expense of workers. And once you acknowledge that people feel what they feel intuitively, that they're not getting a fair shake, then you can go to policy. But I don't think if you look back at our campaign, it's not clear that we really said you got a raw deal and here's what's to blame for it.
No, you're exactly right. We never did. And I will always confess to what I did or didn't do, right or wrong, or admit what I know and don't know. And I'll tell you, Congressman, I had people telling me, Joe, I'm worried. Everyone I'm talking to is telling me, like, they just don't trust this administration. They don't trust what they're being told because they're saying to me, like, I feel this, and they're telling me that that's my reality. And like, there's this huge disconnect. And I didn't see it because I was living in my own sort of blindered bubble, but it is absolutely true. And as we've seen, this election has borne out. And you are exactly right that we were not talking to them from the get-go. But then as soon as you do that, they don't ever tune in. You almost can't get them back. You have to start off with, I see you. I'm validating what you're telling me is true. Let's talk about how I can help you, because you were going to them with real substantive things, which I thought the child care messaging was very resonant. But as much as I said it over and over and over again, it was hitting a steel wall because that trust wasn't there from the get-go, where it was like there was this chasm in between what the American people were feeling and my party was telling them was happening. And so even if I said, my gosh, when I was an educator and I was a paraprofessional making before taxes $14 an hour, when COVID hit and we went half virtual, and my then fourth and second graders had to do virtual school half the day, but I had to go to work full day. We were back in school in my town in September of 2020. I was faced with, am I going to be able to afford childcare, or am I going to, like, how am I going to work if my paycheck is my childcare? So am I going to quit and then I won't have any income? Luckily, a friend who stayed at home came in and took my kids for the virtual part of the day. But even as much as I messaged on this, that Kamala Harris, that the administration has a plan for this, it did not break through. And I think you're speaking to that part of this sort of original sin for why.
Well, Jerry, first of all, I appreciate that you're speaking out on childcare. I introduced a bill recently, which is modeled after Canada. It says childcare should be $10 a day, $300 a month, and childcare workers should be paid $25 an hour because they're doing the most precious and important thing, which is taking care of our young people at the most important age. And that's, if you want to be competitive as a country, you want to make sure kids can read and have literacy and be productive. What could be more important than that? You know what was so heartening to me? I saw a focus group in Pennsylvania of a 37-year-old man who said that the biggest issue for him was paying $16,000 for daycare. So it's not just a women's issue. This is a young father saying, we're paying $16,000. This is crazy. But again, I think you can message that instead of saying, well, we're for a child tax credit of $5,000, and then JD Vance is saying 6,000, we're saying 5,000. I say, young families like this one in Pennsylvania should not have to pay 16,000. They've gotten a raw deal while Silicon Valley is out there, Rose District, making $12 trillion. Why is that? Why is the place that's making the most wealth in the entire world, why can we not, as a country, make sure that everyone has childcare? And so we're going to, for you, we're paying $16,000. You're not going to have to pay more than $300 a month. And we can afford this. And we're going to tax the people who made a lot of money to be able to pay for that, because it's unfair. We've gone from 53rd in income inequality in the world to 128th. And that's not an America that's fair for you or your kids. And I don't think it's the policy as much as how we connect to that 37-year-old guy who's saying, I'm getting shafted because I'm paying $16,000. And sometimes it's the simplicity of a proposal that can break through. Now, I'm not saying, okay, when you legislate that there are not going to be compromises and we can figure out what the income cutoffs are and the percentages. But when you're campaigning, I think you got to be simple, direct, blunt. Childcare $10 a day, just like Trump was direct in some ways. Tariffs at 60%, ridiculous. He's not, but I just think that it's got to be emotionally connecting.
It has to be. You're exactly right, because very few people out there have the capacity to consume so much information like somebody like me, or I geek out on this stuff all the time. Most Americans do not have the inclination to do that. So you really need to hit that spot in their emotions where something clicks and then they want to pay attention. But if you're just talking numbers and sort of hypotheticals and they're not paying attention, they're not going to hear it. And if you do deliver it bluntly, you're right, and just straight to the point, but also with compassion compassion and empathy and those human stories that I think are so important, that is how you break through. That is a lesson moving forward that has to be coupled with obviously the policy, as you said. And, setting aside for a moment all of my potentially hyperbolic, hopefully hyperbolic fears about the future of our democracy now, especially that Matt Gaetz is the attorney general, but I digress.
You think
So
he's going to get confirmed? I mean,
that's an excellent question. I was not planning to ask you, but it just broke. So let's would you mind taking a few minutes to sort of walk me off the edge of this cliff? Because no, in a real like sane world, no, do I think he would get confirmed? But I don't know because I didn't expect the outcome of this election. So do you think he'll get confirmed?
probably because they're probably the Republicans are so afraid of Trump tweeting out that they'd get primaried. But I think that the way he's setting it up uh, is going to help Democrats make a comeback in
Yeah.
2026 and 2028. But we can't take it for granted. I mean, I think if we do some serious introspection and we're ready, we've got a great opportunity to have a comeback.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because this is not a mandate by any measure. I mean, yes, he won the popular vote, but not by the biggest margin ever, or maybe by one of the smallest,
Yeah,
actually.
2%. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's not a
yeah, he
mandate.
won, but it's 2%.
Right. And there are a lot of people, I know they're just gonna run hog wild with this popular vote thing though, but there are a lot of people out there like me who didn't vote for him, almost the same number, who are like, no, 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 I don't want this. And then when it happens, and to this whole idea of actually living this stuff and walking through it, I don't know how quickly Americans will feel some of it. Some of it, I think they'll feel fairly quickly. The economic component, I don't think the price of eggs is going to drop by $1 zillion on day one, but whatever. But I think knowing how many of us are still out there and knowing that it's not a mandate and knowing that people are going to be suffering, that it's going to give us that opportunity with the retooling you're talking about, where we can actually really make some substantive changes in the way that things are done and the way that people receive the information and experience the information and feel seen by their elected officials and candidates. And I think all of that combined with this piece that I contribute to this equation, which again is finding people where they actually are, because they're not always in newspapers and magazines, and they are in podcasts and live streaming and YouTube, and they are in those places. And so adding all of that together and working in concert, that I think, Congressman, that you're giving me hope actually, which is a thing that's in short supply right now for a lot of people, because we're not going to just abandon ship and walk away. We have work to do, and we need to get to that work. And the American people are very much in large number on board with all of this.
Absolutely. I mean, look, Donald Trump won and he won the popular vote, but it was a smaller victory, half the victory of Joe Biden. And I tell people who are sort of down on their luck or defeatist, I said, think of how you felt on January 7th, 2021. And if anyone had told you on that day that Donald Trump would become president in 2024, no one, even the Republicans didn't think so. That's why they didn't convict him. And you're telling me that if Donald Trump can come back, that the Democratic Party can't come back? Look, the reality is that people voted for Trump largely because they thought the prices were too high and they wanted a secure border. But what they're getting now, and we'll get, is people who are going to have mass deportation raids at workplaces. I don't think that's what they were expecting. What they're going to get is, Tulsi and Matt Gaetz and everyone who is loyal to Trump in the administration. And what they're going to get is perhaps the capitulation of Ukraine. So I think Trump, instead, which is a mistake that a lot of presidents make, is overreading a 2% win to say, okay, I'm just going to get all my loyalists in and do whatever you want, as opposed to governing more discreetly in answering the actual mandate or the actual change that people wanted. And that gives the Democrats a great opportunity as he overreaches, but we have to have a positive agenda. And that's what I would sort of focus on. People know Trump. They're going to make their own impression about Trump. I once said that there's not a single word anyone can utter that can change a person's mind about Donald Trump. That's going to happen. Like, what we need to focus on is, what are we going to do? What are we going to build? And be ready for that moment where the pendulum swings back.
Yeah, and you're right, and it will. I believe that. I was talking about the pendulum swing today. By the way, seeing January 6th as a harbinger of hope is a glass half full perspective, sir, I have never heard in my life. But if Donald Trump can come back, then we can come back. I'm happy to spin it that way. That works for me because I'm like looking at it the other way. I'm like, Donald Trump is president after January 6th. All is lost, but all is not lost because look, if he could be a phoenix, so can we. And we're not exactly in the heap of ashes he was. Yeah, but I think forging ahead 1000%, just working, doing the work, positively messaging, seeing the people where they are, being where they are, and not losing hope or sight of what is possible. I appreciate that you have that perspective and that you're working to that end. So thank you for that, and thank you for this conversation because this is one of those things I said to you. This is literally you're walking the walk in what you do every day in your capacity as a congressman, but you're walking the walk by reaching in corners like mine, where my viewers and subscribers and they see you talking to me, and then they see seen by you because you see me. This sounds like a thing, like a song or something or a parody, but you see me, and that makes them feel legitimate as well. And because you make me feel legitimate and validated in believing they want to talk about this stuff. So you are walking
Well,
the walk.
you're very legitimate. You don't need me. You're a force out there, and I appreciate what you're doing. I mean, obviously, you're very thoughtful. You're a teacher, so that doesn't surprise me. And come at this with real substance. And for people who think that doesn't matter, I would just say, deep down, this is still a country that desires to be inspired. I mean, look at the people we admire, whether it's Lincoln or John F. Kennedy or Obama, or even Reagan, who I disagreed with. Some of his speeches were very, very eloquent. And okay, Donald Trump has appealed to sort of the worst instincts in us. And there are times in our country where we're like that. You go out to a bar, you go out to a comedy show, or you go out to a sports bar, maybe people talk like that. But you know what? In our politics, we still yearn for being inspired and substantive. And I think that's what Michelle Obama actually meant when she said, when they go low, we go high. She didn't mean don't fight back. She meant go at a deeper level, go reach into that inspiration. When Democrats do that, that's when we win. And I think this country is still ready to be inspired. And it's people like you who are thoughtful, smart, saying we can do better in our public discourse. That's what's going to win and turn this thing around.
Well, again, thank you so much. My dad came to this country from Lebanon when he was a teenager, and he grew up believing in the shining city on a hill, and he grew up believing in the promise of America, and he ended up spending his entire 50-year career working for the Department of Defense as a weaponry engineer. And so he also walked the walk and embodied this idea of leaning into our better angels and believing in the promise of this country. And he instilled that belief in me, and that will never change. So I'm going to keep
I love
working.
that.
So thank you
And
so much for all that you do.
thank you. Thanks for having this conversation.
Thank you for having it. Well, everybody, that was an incredible conversation. I hope you feel a little bit uplifted by it like I do. Thank you so much again, Congressman Ro Khanna. That concludes this episode of the Are You Effing Kidding Me podcast. We'll see you guys next time. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.